Hi, I'm Peter Stoll, clarinet teacher in Toronto, Canada, and this will be a short video tutorial on how to approach the Gustav Langenus first of the three exercises or studies for developing a light staccato. And Gustav Langenus, a famous Belgian clarinet player and teacher, was principal clarinet in the New York Symphony back in the day, around the turn of the century, the 19th to the 20th. And he wrote this very famous method book in 1913 that was one of the sort of early leading guides to playing the modern BAME system clarinet. And in this method book, there are these three studies for acquiring a light staccato. And the first one has become a real touchstone of modern clarinet teachers in how to approach really teaching articulation and not just staccato, which is the detached or stopped reed variation of that. So one of the issues with this study is the way that Langenus chose to write it. He uses a time signature of 2/4, and he wants to structure this around groups of three notes, one longer note, two shorter notes. But by writing this in 2/4 and packing four of those groups into the bar, he writes everything in a very dense manner where you have 1/16, 2/32, 1/16, 2/32, so you have four of those per bar. And I always wondered with this, why wouldn't he have just written it in 4/4 time, and then you'd have 1/8, 2/16, 1/8, 2/16, which is much more familiar to at least our modern eyes. But the great forte pianist Malcolm Bilson did a great video some years ago that dealt a little bit with some of the notational quirks of the day and how we've maybe lost a little bit of connection to what some composers in past eras might have intended with the way that they notated their music down. And I seem to recall him saying in there that sometimes writing faster looking rhythms indicated notes that were to be played more lightly. And so that might explain why Langenus chose to do it this way. Although I always think in the same vein as this of the slow movement of the Hindemith clarinet sonata, which is I think written in 4/8 time. And again, it looks very, very dense with a lot of rhythms crowded into each measure. And I don't think he was looking for lightness necessarily all the way through that movement, but that's another story. So we have these groups of three notes, and it's a great way to really look at the lightness of tonguing, because someone once compared this to sort of like lifting weights where we flex the muscle in one direction and then release it in the other. And so the idea here is tonguing the two faster notes is where we're flexing the tongue muscle a little more, and then when we get to the single note we have a moment before we do the next pair of fast notes where the tongue can kind of recuperate for a moment. Langenus starts the exercise repeating one pitch for two groups, and then by the middle of the next line or heading towards the end of line 2, he starts to change notes every three notes, and then after about the halfway point in the page, then you're changing notes constantly, and so there's a clear procession outwards from a very basic beginning. I spend most of the time with my students on the very beginning of this because you're really dealing with the mechanics of tonguing. To be fair and give him his due, Langenus is clear. He states the tempo as allegretto, so not super fast, and he states it to an eighth note pulse. He puts 144 to the eighth. And again, I always point out to my students that this is not three studies, it's not titled Three Studies for Acquiring a Fast Staccato, which is the usual clarinet player obsession, but a light one. So let's start at something like 100. So we're going to fit each group of three notes to one of those. And so on. So really, really great. It's very simple material, G major, E minor, but really, really useful for just getting right to the heart of, is somebody able to start notes lightly and getting into the staccato part, are they in fact making staccato, or do you hear this? And I'll come back to that because that actually has its usefulness, but at a slow tempo, you can really use this to teach the idea that once you've accomplished the light tip under tip kind of articulation, that then we're really looking for the sound of silence after the single notes. So again, with staccato, without, let's do it without. With. Really, you're mostly going to hear that detached moment of silence after the single notes, what he notates as 16th notes. The 30 seconds go by too fast, especially as you go to faster tempos, to really hear that. So again. Now, where things can get interesting is once you have a student who is able to accomplish those things, the light beginning of the note, the bringing the tongue against the reed and leaving it there a fraction longer to stop the sound, which creates that detached silence for staccato, and of course steady air throughout. I mean, everything with articulation pretty much tends to come back to the idea of maintaining steady air pressure and not trying to stop the air between notes. What would that sound like? I mean, you can't do it, and that's one of the great genius points of this brilliant study is you can't do it that way. But then going beyond that, what if we go faster? And so now let's try. That's there around 120. I'm still able to have a moment of silence after the single notes, and that's great. But as we go faster than that, in fact, I think we get to a point where you can't really close the end of the note off. You can't leave the tongue against the reed that long. The tempo just keeps moving forward. So let's go to Langenus's marking of 144. At that point, I'm just playing. It's just too fast. Or you can do a tiny bit of stop after the single notes, but not for long. Speaking of too fast, by that point, many of us will start to reach close to the limits of single tongue. And so this also makes an excellent practice for double tonguing. So, of course, you would double tongue the groups of the 230 seconds. Etc. And you can take this up as fast as you like to go. I've heard of one fairly famous clarinet articulator in the States, the great Robert Spring, and I believe he's said he goes beyond 200 with this. And that might even be single tonguing in his case, but it's certainly, as you see, for such a simple sounding exercise, it's incredibly versatile, the things that we can do with it. So I hope this has been useful, and I absolutely recommend this study to everyone. Just try to, maybe it'll all change in our new online universe, but traditionally teachers have made a copy because the actual Langenus method is pretty thick. And then we just keep copying that same page, and those photocopies start to get a little bit faded out and hard to read, and it is nice to actually see the music that he wrote. So there's my copy, and I really do treasure this study. Thanks very much, and best of luck.